Today I want to talk about something that I think has a profound impact on a lot of the discussion that we have in almost every realm of research or study: academic, religious conversation, political discourse, really anything. And I think this is very undiscussed and overlooked, but it's the phenomenon of uh, condescending and arrogant tone and the effect that that can have on an individual.
Popular elite snobbishness. Oh, he's someone who still believes in the sovereign individual. We all know that all of the really smart thinkers today don't believe in the sovereign individual. We're just accumulations of all of the past things that have gone before us. We're just what? What he's basically whispering is meaning crisis.
PVK is using an exaggerated example of this tone, but the underlying concept is far more present in much of our public discourse than we tend to admit. Some of this may be some of this may be done in genuine ignorance. People are generally ignorant that they are being condescending, that they are presenting in an arrogant tone. And those who have long pursued specific courses of academic pursuit are likely genuinely convinced that their position is so obviously correct that they have no idea of the power that their tone has on the newcomer to an arena. Now, I think some of this may be, in part, due to this kind of like left brain, right brain problem that Ian McGilchrist discusses. And I got his book. I have not really read it yet, but I've watched the interviews, obviously. And, it seems that there's this kind of thing where the left brain can't handle the open-ended nature of things. And so the more you become expert in one field of study, the left half of your brain convinces you that the field that you are studying is a complete closed system that you can grasp and fully understand. And once you fully understand it, your left brain basically becomes kind of taken up with its the obviousness of what it believes, and that can, I think, result in a condescending tone. And that's to give someone the benefit of the doubt that they're not trying to do this. I have another really great example that comes from the Anadromous channel, Burn Power, and he has a lecture from Hans Ruckmacher, and it's this video on the 4 points of scholarship. And this is a really great example that he gives.
Statement against all popular belief today, because everybody looks at science to give the final answers. And the final answers today are people expect to come from the scientists. Science and scholarship is the revelation that this world has and that it looks to. There we can know. You see, if somebody says, science has proved, everybody stops talking and says, yes, amen. No, they don't say amen, but the equivalent to that. You see? So we just accept it because it is science who has said it. Science has proved. Science has never proved anything. Science made an assertion, a tentative statement, which has to be proved to be true. And maybe it takes another 50 years that we found that it was completely wrong. I have found, maybe I said it before, but I'm re-saying it then, that the most dangerous statement is when people say, of course. Of course this is this like this. Well, if somebody says of course, then be very, very critical, because it means that most people agree. Well, if most people agree, it may be the superstition of our age.
As I said, there is an inherent unavoidability to this phenomenon. We cannot move forward in any area without resting on some assumptions. We must build what we build, the knowledge that we use, on some kind of foundation. Now, some people are dedicated to the building of foundations, but these types of people often go unnoticed because they do not make a fantastic discovery. The epistemologists must come before the new philosophers and the theoretical thinkers that shape the new paradigms. But someone who's studying epistemology either is going to come to some conclusion that it's really impossible to know what we know, or that there's a very limited amount of things that we can be sure of. And I think that this is where we get into the materialist viewpoint that is so prominent in society, and the idea that only things that are empirically verifiable are real or are actually able to be known. Well, that's a very small, limited range of things. And as people have gone down that belief, usually because of this arrogance, at some point they hit a dead end. And then they have to say, we can't be sure of the things that we thought we were certain of. And then everything kind of unravels and they become more and more uncertain. And I think that is a good thing because, if we're all honest, we have no idea how much we don't know. And the things that we do know and we think we're certain of is a very small thing. Something I've thought about many times, and I've mentioned in some of my other videos, is this idea that faith is not this blind leap across a chasm. That's not what faith is. Faith is, it's building a structure without vetting the foundation, or without vetting it to its ultimate ends. The farther down you dig, the more secure your foundation is going to be, and the more you can build before your structure collapses. But there's a limit to how much we build foundations versus how much we build structures. And so this is where I think the element of faith comes in. Those who trust in faulty foundations can build very quickly, and therefore they have an advantage in presenting their ideas to questioners. They frame the questions that they can answer, and they hide the questions that they cannot answer from being asked. So, in other words, take, for example, so much of our current science is based on this empirical data model, scientism, as some of the speakers were complaining about Bishop Barron and in the recent Jordan Peterson discussion. They make science the foundation of everything. They make that, and what can be seen and measured empirically is the foundation. And then they can build a whole bunch of things on top of that, but at a certain point, there's a limit to what can be built on that foundation. And as you get to the uppermost realm of things like meaning, well, it has no answer for meaning. It doesn't have an answer for why we should live, or how morally we should behave. This is the classic problem that you cannot derive an ought from an is. It's a very good foundation if we only want to know about what is, but it's faulty if we're trying to use that foundation to learn about what ought to be and what we ought to do. Whereas, the foundation of the church, the foundation of Christianity, it's not perfect, but it's has some more answers to some of these things. And I believe it's resilient enough that as new problems rise up in society and in the way people are thinking, the church has the structure, the foundations are strong enough that we can go down into the basement and examine those foundations, and we can find where there may be cracks and there may be weak spots, and we can repair that structure without dismantling the whole thing. So the question is, how do people become snobbish elites? How do people become the sort of people that cause, I would say, real psychological trauma in our world? How do they become that? Well, I believe we can look at a line of causality back to when they were new in a field and they became embarrassed by some other elite. And I think that embarrassment is really the key thing to look at here. Arrogance and the snobbish attitude is the outcome that we see, but the cause of it and what it causes is embarrassment. So it causes other people to be embarrassed, and it was a result of those people being embarrassed earlier on. And I grabbed a couple of paragraphs about embarrassment from Psychology Today website, and it says this: frequently grouped with shame and guilt, embarrassment is considered a self-conscious emotion, and it can have a profoundly negative impact on a person's thoughts or behavior. The embarrassed individual becomes conscious of a real or imagined failure to comply with social norms and fears that others won't view them as highly as a result. The ensuing embarrassment may be accompanied by feelings of awkwardness, exposure, shame, guilt, or regret. So that's a good definition of what embarrassment is, and a little bit, I think obviously we've all experienced that at some point in our life, but it has a purpose, and this next paragraph kind of explains a little bit more about what the purpose of it is. Embarrassment is a painful but important emotional state. Most researchers believe that the purpose of embarrassment is to make people feel badly about their social or personal mistakes as a form of internal or societal feedback, so that they learn not to repeat the error. So, in other words, when we make a mistake, a foolish mistake, you feel embarrassment. And if there are a structure of people around you that cause you to feel that embarrassment, it's a sort of psychological trauma that they make you feel. And then that modifies your behavior. Now, this system is not inherently bad. It could be good or bad. And Chris Petkow had a little bit where he talked about trauma as a sort of transformative thing and he was speaking in regard to, the use of psychedelics, which is the big hot topic. And I have not done enough research to fully flesh out my opinions up on it. At some point in the future, I will. I will say the church really needs to figure out a little bit more of their theology in regard to pharmakia, because, this is an example of one Greek word that had a specific meaning in its time and place, and it was in a time when the world was far more limited. Our world has expanded so much that there's so many different things that could fit under that category. But do we treat all those things the same way that we treat the substances and the behaviors that the Apostle Paul was writing against? I don't know. Those are big questions to answer.
Will I get possessed by a demon is what he's asking. Maybe, if not done in the correct context and setting and environment, and if you're not in a positive place, trauma always makes room for evil. To me, I have this conception that trauma is your opportunity for trauma means transformation. If you experience trauma, any type, transformation. It can be a good transformation or an evil transformation. You could get possessed by the devil or you could get possessed by God. But that comes down to the choices within yourself. And the reason they point towards setting and even having a shaman or someone sober in front of you is to help you, to guide you, to get you towards making the right choice. Because when you're disorientated like that, you don't know what to do. The big one that is often talked about is, like Peterson says, like if you willingly, voluntarily face something difficult in life in general, but this applies to a psychedelic experience, and you face it in your psychedelic experience, you can then address it, deal with it, and then overcome it. If you run away from it, get scared, that will fractally, exponentially cause more trauma, and then more fear, and then we won't get into demon possession further than that, but it can have negative effects, right?
Trauma, including psychological trauma and social trauma, the kind that happens when someone makes another person feel embarrassed through snobbery, through elitism, is a transformative thing. And it can be a good transformative thing if it's used properly. If people are acting immature and you make them feel embarrassed because they're not acting according to their age, for instance, in the raising of children, if a 4-year-old is acting like a baby and throwing temper tantrums, then, they need to understand that's not appropriate behavior, and you should feel embarrassed. And if you do feel embarrassed, then that feeling, which will help you not to repeat that action, has been used well as a good thing. However, I think that a lot of times what we're experiencing now is a sort of intellectual bullying. And I think that this, you could trace it all in a line. It goes back to the very first snob, who was the serpent, Satan, also known as the devil. Because wasn't Eve embarrassed when she was told that she was wrong about what God said about the tree? The serpent said, "Did God really say this?" And Eve told him, "Well, God said, don't eat of this tree or even touch it." And she changes the words a little bit. And then what does Satan do? That's not what God really meant. It's snobbery. It's arrogance. And obviously we can't perfectly nail down the tone, but I do believe that that is an element of it. And that while she was convinced and she saw the fruit and saw that it looked good and took, and agreed with him, I believe that embarrassment was present in her response. And I think that's, you could, in a sense, say that moment carries on and on and on and on. And I think you look at Cain and Abel in the next generation, and it's a similar thing. Cain was jealous of his brother. What is that feeling? The feeling that his sacrifice was not worthy is a form of embarrassment. Now, I'm not saying that Abel was being elite or a snob. That's not implied there, but the feeling of embarrassment is a motivator in what caused Cain to sin. And so if arrogance and snobbery is something that can also cause that feeling of embarrassment, we can't discount it. It's a very powerful thing. And what it is intellectual bullying. And intellectual bullying is simply a more socially respected form of bullying. Now, I do have a personal example of this, and this is a really eye-opening incident because it wasn't something that I actually had very strong feelings about, but it allowed me to analyze my response and the scenario that I was in and think about this. And I've thought about this many times over the years, which shows the power of this sort of interaction. So while I was in college, I remember for some reason, the end of the semester, I was having a discussion with the professor. I believe it was my philosophy class. He was the professor for a couple of the classes I took. It was a small college. But I believe it's in regards to the philosophy class, and discussing the final paper or something. And I said something, or in regard to the discussion, and he said something like this: "You're not suggesting a tripartite theology, are you? You don't believe in that, do you?" And I said, "Oh no, of course not." And I didn't even know whatever the discussion was about. That wasn't what I was trying to say. And I didn't even really exactly know what he was talking about. I think he may have clarified. Maybe I asked a clarifying question. I don't remember. But he was talking about this idea of a dichotomy versus a trichotomy in theology, philosophy, etc., with the dichotomy being that a human is essentially, a body and a spirit, or a body and a soul, two parts, a material and a non-material, versus a trichotomy, which is more or less derived from the use of the phrases, body, soul, and spirit in the Bible, and therefore breaking your being into three parts instead of two. And it wasn't something I had ever really considered or thought of, before. Is there a distinction? What is, how, is it important? And most theologians are in the dichotomy, the two-part camp. The three-part is kind of a fringe, less popular idea, because it's really not as important. It makes this big distinction about separate parts in a part of our being that we're already not very good at discussing or understanding. So it sort of just makes things more complicated than they need to be. I realized in editing that I forgot to explain the point of why I was telling that story. So this interaction was about something that was not particularly meaningful to me, or that I had ever really given a lot of thought about. But to have a very smart professor who I did respect, and who really was a great guy, kind of asked me this question with this sort of, I don't want to say he was being arrogant or snobby, but this oh my gosh, you don't actually believe this dumb thing, do you, kind of tone, was a very jarring situation. And it was a very memorable thing. As I said, this was, I don't know, maybe 15 years ago or something. So that I can remember that, and to this day, not the details of it. As I said, pretty sure that's what it was about, but, I don't remember the exact words he said, but I do remember the way that it made me feel. And this was on a relatively minor topic of very little importance, and it actually was not challenging one of my strongly held beliefs, but allowed me to think about, is this the scenario that happens when a Christian kid goes to the secular university and the professor says, "You don't really believe the Bible," or "Of course we know Darwinism explains everything," or whatever arrogant thing. That the power in that way that those words are presented, unless someone's foundation of belief or their certainty of what they know is extremely strong, you can crush a lot of good things under the weight of that arrogance and that snobbery. And so that was my personal example to say, this is a serious thing, and I don't think we should take it lightly. And I think that we should be aware of, even in this little corner of the internet, when we make assertive comments about beliefs that we hold, they may not be settled subjects for others, and perhaps we should, give a grain of wisdom in how we communicate those sorts of things. So, end of edit. So, this is the academic equivalent of the cool kids on the playground making the poor kids feel bad. this is a type of evil that needs to be called out. Because absolutely absurd truths will go unquestioned if they are believed in this way. And I want to finish with a couple of more examples from C.S. Lewis. Now, C.S. Lewis has a really great example of this in this book here, That Hideous Strength, one of my absolute favorite books. And in this book, the main character, Mark Studdock, is absolutely and completely motivated by this idea of trying to impress the snobs around him. And over again, the author is pointing out the absurdity of these people that Mark is trying to win the approval of. And a lot of it's based on an essay that Lewis had. 2 essays, actually. The book is roughly based on the essay called The Abolition of Man, but a lot of it is also comes from another essay called The Inner Circle. And that's where C.S. Lewis talks about this thing that, as humans, we always feel like outsiders, and we always want to get into the inner circle. And, unless if we have a right relationship with God, which helps us to understand ourselves, the inner circles that we're always trying to get into will evade us, and they're not beneficial for us. And, so Mark Studdock, all of his motivation is basically avoidance of embarrassment. And he's always being pushed around by snobs and elites and desiring to be part of this inner circle. And the elites need to use snobbery to guard their inner circle, because unless if somebody is willing to bend over backwards and accept all of their absurd truths, then, if they let a normal person with common sense in, then it would instantly destroy their circle, because their circle is based on these inconvenient truths, or inconvenient lies, I should say, that they're forced to believe. And another example Lewis has is in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And after Lucy and Edmund both go through the wardrobe, and this is Lucy's second visit into Narnia. The first time she was very sad that nobody believed her. And then Edmund also goes through, and he encounters the White Witch, who obviously taints him through evil. And when he gets out, and Lucy tries to tell her brother and sister, look, Edmund's been in there with me. He knows that it's real. Edmund, he says that he was only pretending to play with Lucy. And he basically takes this elite, snobby attitude and belittles her and makes her feel extremely embarrassed. And he does great harm, and he almost succeeds in a sense of that embarrassment, causes her to doubt what she knew to be true. It caused her to doubt herself, and it caused her to become a more closed off person who was not willing to learn and explore and imagine. And I think that that's really a key thing, is that this idea of, if you make people feel embarrassed, you are controlling their behavior in a certain way that could have a potential good when people are acting very immaturely. But for healthy people to become embarrassed, whatever circumstances you are experiencing when you become embarrassed, that's the thing that you are going to stop doing. And so if we make healthy people with a good outlook on life, good imaginations, productive, kind, loving, normal behavior, if we make them feel embarrassed, then we are doing great harm, because the person is going to look at their current circumstance, everything that they were doing, and they're going to say, that is the stuff that I must avoid. These are the behaviors that I have to avoid to escape feeling this feeling of embarrassment again. And I think that Lewis writes so well about this, because he, in some of his biographies, if you read about him, he experienced a high level of trauma in these elite private schools. That he was fortunate enough, his father worked hard to get him into these elite schools, but they were very much, home to a bunch of spoiled, privileged children who valued, physical sportsmanship and things like that, which Lewis wasn't very good at, rather than academic achievement, although that was certainly part of it. But it was a place where he was very traumatized, and he no doubt felt a high degree of embarrassment in regards to some of his deficiencies as an athlete and things like that. And, in some ways we can say, some of that trauma probably did shape him in a good way, because it caused him to pursue his, he wasn't being embarrassed because of his imagination or because of his academic insights or his mind. He was being embarrassed for some of his physical deficiencies. So he abandoned those pursuits, and he instead went into pursuing the sorts of things for which we now know and love him: his writing and his critique of literature and his imagination and all these things. So in a sense, the embarrassment that he suffered was beneficial for him and for us, but it doesn't discount the fact that it caused trauma. And for every person who is embarrassed about something that they're actually bad at and find something that they're much better at, I think that there's a lot of people that probably feel embarrassed for things that they should grow in and need to develop, but they cast them aside. And especially I think this is a problem just in the world that we live in today, where if you go on YouTube, it took a while for me to find the Paul Vanderklay channels and to find out that there are people who aren't making perfectly polished, super edited videos, and that there's people that are creating content where the content is more important than the presentation. But if I hadn't found that, the likelihood that I would have been willing to start this channel is very low, because I would not have felt adequate. And then if you get into some specific thing, like as an example, you can see I have several guitars, and I've been playing music for a long time, and I think I'm pretty good. But compared to the people whose YouTube channels or Instagram channels or whatever are solely about musicianship, playing the guitar, there's we are so constantly exposed to people at such high skill levels that it's very detrimental to giving someone the confidence to start trying something. And everybody is bad at things when they begin. But I think that, a Chesterton quote is that if something is worth doing, it's worth doing poorly. And, that's part of why I'm doing this channel. That's why I'm doing this research, and I'm not an expert. I'm not perfect at this, but I think that I do have some insights, and I think that I do have some things to offer. And to the best of my ability, I'm going to disregard the critics and the criticism that makes me feel embarrassed for what I'm trying to do, and instead listen to my creator, who I believe is encouraging me to do this work. And so that's something I think that we need to keep in mind. I think that, this subject kind of ties into a lot of other things, and I'm not going to explore that today, but I think it's something to keep in mind, because, how many good ideas have been stopped abruptly in their pursuit because of embarrassment caused at some point or another? And is it the product of arrogance and snobbish elitism? And so I think we need to be really aware of this as we listen to sources, and especially those who are maybe taking the other position. How much are people succeeding on the strength of their arguments versus succeeding because they are intellectually bullying people with arrogance and snobbery and elitism. So those are the things to keep in mind as you view videos and lectures and things like that. I think we always have to keep that a little bit in mind, is how much is this person presuming to know more than me, and you know, that condescension. Can we remove that from the equation and then evaluate the things more fairly? So something to consider. Thank you for watching and listening.